Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. Feels a bit weird doing it this way instead of those bloody webcam videos. Today's video might be a long one, so sit down, strap in, get a cup of tea, get some coffee. Today we are going to be reviewing a book, but not just any book, oh no. This book is the creme de la creme of fiction. Yes, it is My Immortal by Gregory James Jackson. No, the book is actually called Stones to Abbigale, the first of 3 books which dearest Gregory James, Jim Bob, has written. So we are going to review this. Now I know this may not be the most original of ideas. I know that Strange Aeons did this a million years ago, but I had to see for myself if it was as bad as people were saying it was. It doesn't disappoint, so do make sure you enjoy today's video. For as long as I remember, I've enjoyed seeing how people move around and talk to each other, like they're all animals at the zoo. I would try to deliver a more accurate analogy if I felt there was one, but so many of them seem incredibly unaware of themselves, just living life as if it were some generic predefined routine. Sometimes I felt like an alien who had a VIP pass to submerge myself in primitive human culture, just for entertainment. So we're already off to a very strong start. As you can see, the main character thinks he's better than everyone else. For those of you who aren't in the know, I am actually writing a book about a reptilian that causes Brexit, and my reptilian main character does indeed talk like this. James, sometimes. If my hands seem dirty when I run them through my hair, it's not because my hair's gross, it's because I put that dry shampoo in that has like a hint of like darkness in it, so you don't get white bits in your hair if you're a brunette like me, but it's making my hands dirty, so fucking good one, mate. Cheers. So yeah, the reptilian talks like this sometimes, but better obviously because I am writing it. However, they're allowed to talk like that because they are from a species that is thousands of years more advanced than humans. So what's your excuse, Grog, when you are less of an advanced species and more of the missing link that scientists have been searching for? On my way to the class, a fight had already broken out between 2 jocks who, no doubt, both had controlling, iron-fisted fathers who brainwashed them into believing conflicts between men are best resolved with the bloodying of their fists. These kinds of men plagued my mind with wonder. I could not conceive a scenario in which they could justify their primitive and pointless mentalities, yet they would always continue to perpetuate their self-destructive attitudes as if it offered the slightest legitimate benefit. So remember, James, the main character, is just a self-insert of Onision. This is exactly what Onision thinks about things. The main character just is Greg, under not even a different name because he calls himself James now. He's very different, he's very quirky, I am very smart. Most everyone nearby. This isn't even the self-insert talking. Greg is always saying things like most everyone because he's a nitwit. Most all fights seemed avoidable. Most everyone / most all. What do you mean? What do you mean? What are you trying to say? That's more of a pet peeve of mine though, I mean... As I approached my next class, the image of Abby's face illuminated the neon walls of my mind like a projector, teasing a theatre screen with fleeting moments of depth and purpose. Ever since I met her, she had occupied a part of my consciousness. Whenever I wasn't near her, I missed her to an unrealistic extent. You could call my longing sad, especially considering we had barely talked. She just had a strange effect on me, one no doubt similar to a willful addiction. You know how in previous videos I've criticised Onision for obsessing over girls that he might have kissed 10 years ago in high school? This self-insert drivel is proof of what I was banging on about previously. He was just another moron, placed on this earth to live his life completely unexamined, a pawn that had no awareness of its own role, let alone that it was just another tiny component within a massive, unstoppable, twisted game. I know it sounds morbid and condescending, but my attitude was just something that naturally developed the more I studied human behaviour. Onision, I mean James, has galaxy brain levels of IQ. The rest of you might not get it. You're not really on his level. You probably can't understand how deep and interesting and intelligent he is. I can practically hear Onision sucking his own dick as I read this. Onision would have his ribs removed if it meant that he could deep throat himself harder. This book is so edgy and so I'm smarter than you, and we're only 5 pages in. I would rather catch the coronavirus than read any more of this, but we shall continue for the sake of this video. But before we do go on, I want you to imagine something. Imagine getting a hard copy of this. Imagine you're a tree and you've been hanging around you know, because trees, they're rooted to the ground, so they can only hang around one place. You've been knocking around for 200 years, and then you get cut down, turned into paper, and made into this garbage. Imagine the audacity. I sighed, knowing I was bound to be paired up with Alex, a guy I had specifically asked to be seated away from ever since he peed in a jar literally right next to me under our desk, acting like he was so cool for publicly exposing himself while simultaneously urinating. I know it's a self-insert, but he's meant to be, what, 16, 17 in this? I'm not going to call it a book. I'm not going to insult books like that. The Ramblings of a Madman would probably be better. But say the characters are about 16. What 16 says things like publicly exposing himself? With a cocky grin, Jason stood up and in a comedic fashion smelled his armpit. Wow, I didn't know I smelled that bad. Now, okay, it's been a long time since I was a teenager, but do they really act like this? Mrs. Stanley continued, if there's anyone else who has an issue, please take it up with my 1-800 number, which is... She put her hand up to the air, signalling the students to react, but only a couple kids replied aloud with her catchphrase, 1-800 boo-hoo, they mumbled. No one has said this ever. No one in the history of ever. No one has said this. The realism of this shitpost is off the charts. By the way, I just decided we're now calling this mess a shitpost because I refuse to believe that he's writing any of this with sincerity. I refuse to believe it. Let me live in blissful ignorance. So Abby, the character that James, Gregory, whoever is obsessing over, gives Grog James a note. On my way to my next class, I opened the note. I didn't understand why, but it read Niseone. Oh God, she's trying to spell out Onision, like a shaman summoning a devil spirit. The Grudge sees Abby and her boyfriend kiss, and we're treated to this next passage. I felt like after a life of numbness I was finally about to truly feel warmth for the first time, only to have it all taken away in an instant, leaving me hopeless in the shadows, alone once again. Honestly, this is more emo than Twilight. Oh yeah, I said it. I went there. So you can tell this book is fiction because in this book, the Grease actually has a friend called Davis, and the friend spends the entire time sucking Grease off.
My God, you're greasy.
No, you're not. You're one of the coolest guys I know, Davis replied. I continued my silence as he offered words of encouragement. Okie dokie. Well, you're awesome and should be super happy. So if you want to talk, I'm your buddy. So I'm here to talk. That dialogue, Stephen King is quaking. That night my mum was literally just serving lentil beans she prepared in her crock pot for the billionth time. A fair exaggeration, but still, it was excessive to say the least. Well, I was literally used in this context. Don't like it. Don't know if it's correct or not, I just don't like it. If I want to be really nitpicky, don't like it. Not good. After the rerun of lentil soup, I washed the dishes per my mum's orders and headed to the shower. I sat on the floor of the tub thinking about Abby, barely feeling the water as it hit my chest. Definitely fiction, we know that the grease doesn't wash. The note is actually a code for Abby's number. Who could have seen that coming? And James finishes beating off in the shower and gives her a call. And that's the end of chapter 1. This is already taking a long time. Chapter 2 begins with the teacher complaining that Jim Bob is always late and then offers him a job as a teaching assistant because fuck it, cartoon logic. I began cutting the bear with a scalpel Mrs. Stanley provided me, but my muscles seemed to work on their own as I found myself consumed with Abby again, her overwhelming presence on the edge of every thought fragment in my mind. Jimmy, your character sounds like a serial killer. Is that the vibe you're going for? Is that the narrative voice you want? Ted Bundy? Abby doesn't turn up to art class, so Jimmy gets all mopey Edward Cullen about it. I wasn't going to skate to school this time out of fear it would rust my skates and hinder my ability to skate fast, if even at all. 3 skates in 1 sentence, and they said it couldn't be done. Also, there's something to be said about the fact that this Gary Stu-esque main character is who Greg thinks he is in real life. So, does Greg skate? Does he think skating's cool? Like, I have so many questions. As I climbed up the bus steps, Davis ran out, "Hallelujah, James is here to save everyone from the evil clouds." Sorry, but is Davis 12? I know Grog likes hanging out with underage people, but this is a little bit ridiculous, don't you think? James then gets his ass beaten by a jock for some forced drama. He does nothing to defend himself or hit back, and I only mention that because of this next passage. As my nose began to bleed, one of the boys my sisters was friends with, Matthew, grabbed me and pulled me out of the fight. He was twice my size, but was also on Jason's football team, so naturally he did nothing to help me win. He did nothing to help me win. You yourself did nothing to help yourself win. I can feel Onision's entitlement dripping through this main character. Anyway, James gets suspended from school for 2 days for being involved in a fight, and he sees Abby and her boyfriend Seth arguing. Seth reacted to me like a guard dog in a ghetto-fenced yard once he realised I was headed towards him. Ghetto-fenced yard is an interesting turn of phrase to use, Groggo. Seth shouts at Abby because he is a bad guy, trademark, and they seem to break up. Recklessly, Seth floored the gas pedal and his car lurched forward, barely missing Abby and me as he pulled out of the parking lot. God, I wish he hadn't have missed. That would have been the end of this tragic tale if so. It starts raining and we are treated to this insightful piece of philosophy. I hear running is just as bad as walking in the rain, I said. You get just as wet, she replied. Yeah, something like that. It's like the harder you try to fix some problems, the worse they get. Wow. Move over, Confucius. The rain smears Abby's makeup and we find out that she has bruises on her face. Jam gives her a hug, walks her home, and that's it. That's the end of that chapter. Nothing of value has been written thus far. Chapter 3 opens with a dream about Abby being eaten up by the ground, and it's very dramatic. I then woke up to my room filled with sunlight, but it could not change the darkness my dream left me with. I bet Greg felt so pleased with himself after he wrote that sentence. Bet he was really feeling himself that day. So James, writes a letter to Abby. No, but listen to this letter. I'm going to read it out in full and tell me it doesn't remind you of all those weird stalkery emails he sends to anyone who he thinks will listen. Never sent one to me though so far. When I look in your eyes, I at times feel a level of sadness I have never felt, as if we, despite barely knowing each other, have been apart for far too long. When I talk to you, it is like I'm listening to a voice I've ached for yet haven't heard in a lifetime. Every other experience I have with you seems familiar, but at the same time, it hurts. Like you would feel if you begged for something and only received it when you had already given up hope. These feelings are all so strange and evolving at a rate that scares me, as they are for someone I am only just now truly getting to know. Even with my brief presence in your life, I've picked up on so much suffering and almost feel powerless to create any change. There are so many wounds, so many scars, so much I only know about enough to fear. I'm trying to understand. Abby, you have more pain in your life than I can imagine. I hear it in your voice, I see it in your eyes and in the way you move. I just want to see you smile without there being an ocean wall of tears behind your eyes. I want to hear everything you have to say. I want to find I want to find a way to heal the damage done until you can forget it ever existed. Abby rings him and asks to meet up, but then she ghosts him and that's it. That's the end of that chapter. What chapter are we on now? That's the end of chapter 3. Literally nothing has happened. Chapter 4 opens. Abby isn't in her art class yet again. Does no one care about these teenagers getting a proper education? Opening the door, I could see Abby wasn't inside. Instead, there were just pieces of my bear, soon to pieces of her bear, sitting on the desk. Maybe I was reading too far into what it meant. I could really only hope that there was something left to us that I could sew back together. So deep. I'm in pure tears, pal. Can't stop crying. Abby leaves a note for James to tell James to meet her behind the church, and he just skips class and goes. Clearly the teachers don't give a fuck about their jobs or the next Ofsted report. As I approached the church, there was a strong, forceful wind blowing behind me that made it feel as if I was being pushed to her by nature itself. I felt like a fool for thinking that. I'm far too unimportant for any significant force to consciously influence my life. When I read that, I don't know why that passage made me laugh so much. Like, imagine having such poor self-esteem that you have to use nature to dab on yourself. Anyway, so he meets Abby and she cries, and she alludes to being abused by her ex-boyfriend and her father. So then, in turn, Jim Bob says, every time I see you, you become more beautiful to me than before. Because we all know how much Greg loves people when they are at their most vulnerable. But I digress. So the next chapter starts and there's a stranger at James's house, and James says, so who is this gentleman? Because that is totally how teenagers talk. Anyway, this random bloke is his mum's new boyfriend and blah blah blah, boring, let's move on. As I climbed on the bus the next day, Davis hollered, praise be to James, our hero has arrived. I smiled as I always did. I hated loving his hilarious lines. They were a kind of tradition for Davis. Every time I stepped on the bus, he would yell them. You can tell Onision doesn't have any real best friends because he thinks people act like this. His imaginary friend calls him a hero. My real life best friend calls me a pig every 2 seconds. Davis then jumped up and yelled, "You hear that, everyone? My best buddy thinks I'm pretty fantastic." It's weird and kind of funny that James is just Onision's self-insert, as we've mentioned a bunch of times before, and he's using Davis to like big himself up. As in, it's weird and funny that an adult in their 30s is trying to stroke their own ego to this extent. James sees the guidance counsellor or the nurse, or I can't tell, I don't know. Whoever it is, she tells him not to get involved with Abby. Ooh, mysterious. So the nurse guiding counsellor person makes him a teaching assistant and then rearranges his class so he can still do PE with Abby, even though they just said don't get involved with Abby. Is this a plot? Is this what I'm reading? When I approached her to sit down, she pulled out my backpack and shook it. Your backpack has a lot of interesting things in it. He used the wrong your. He used the wrong your. We're not critiquing his book in that kind of way, but he used the wrong your, and I love that for us. Yes, I love that for us. Imagine publishing something and using the wrong your. Can't relate. As class came to a close, we gathered our things and began to walk out. "Bye, Mrs. Stanley, I'll miss you." Mrs. Stanley responded, calling me the F word in her natural offensive fashion and gave the class an awkward semi-shocked laugh. Again, these teachers really don't care about that Ofsted report. James's new PE teacher is Jason's uncle. Plot twist. M. Night Shyamalan, eat your heart out. Who the fuck is Jason? Don't worry, between you and me, kid's a prick, just like his dad. Oh, well, I'm glad that drama got averted. Also, what kind of school is this? For real. Why are these teachers always swearing all the time? What's going on? Running over to me, Abby sat down and gave me a big hug. "I'm so glad you're still in the class with me," she said. The gym shirt was hiked up her arms so I could feel her skin contact on my neck. The sensation was glorious. You like that, Greg? You like that? Why are you all judging me for? He's the one that popped a boner over an arm. Glorious. I never really understood the human tendency to feel sorry for yourself when you're being punished for breaking rules you were well aware of. I don't know, Greg. Weird how people can do that, isn't it? We're only a third of the way through this shitpost so far. Kill me. After the gym, they call each other and they talk about leprechauns. It's not a joke. It's just something that happens. Uh-oh, here comes the plot. It's back with a vengeance. Jimmy's mother wants to move in with her new boyfriend, even though they've only been dating for all of like 2 minutes, and this could mean that they'll move away. Oh no. I'm on the edge of my seat in worry. Davis could see my upset posture out his window as the bus pulled up, so as I walked up the steps this time, he screamed, "I love you so much. I wish you were my boyfriend." What am I reading? What is this? As I sat down, Davis grabbed me and hugged me. Someone sitting a few seats ahead screamed, "Ooh, homos," which made Davis yell back, "I love him. This is love. You're not fighting for love." Sorry. He jumped onto the seat with his little body and pressed our faces side by side. "Look at our love." I patted his arm that had been wrapped around me sarcastically, and he released me to sit down. Immediately, he asked, "So what's up, buddy? How can I turn that frown upside down? Poopy, poo, poop." Reading this is making me a worse person. And I can't go on. I just can't. But I must. So James tells Abby about this new drama, and Abby is all, "Oh my god, I'll come with you, I'll come live with you," even though they've been dating for like a week, but okay, sure, pop off, queen. Get your man, honey. This is Twilight, the even worse version. She giggled excitedly and immediately jumped on me while simultaneously wrapping her legs around me, happily kissing every part of my face but my lips. I said, "Whoa," laughing and thinking in the back of my mind about how surprisingly easy she was to carry. Firstly, vom. Secondly, why do I feel like that last line is subtle shade? If you know, you know. You barely pay attention to any other girls, even when they talk to you. You rarely even look at them most of the time. I laughed and replied, "I do that intentionally, you know." She asked why, and I continued, "Because I don't want to risk you thinking for a second you're not the most important person to me." She replied in an amused tone, "Even when I'm not around?" I added, "When you're not around, I like to pretend you still are." So in a way, there's no such thing as being without you. Yeah, he's gonna kill her and wear her spleen as a hat. Davis was sitting next to me on the bus. He was talking about his Lego collection and how he loved matching colours in a sequence within the structures he assembled. He said it made him feel like there was some balance and order to his life in a weird way. While I listened to Davis, my thoughts partially remained on Abby. She continued to fill my mind with hope no matter where I was or what I was doing. Okay, number one, I'm very aware that Lego is for adults as well, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I get it. But isn't it funny how I just said Davis is like a child, and now they're talking about him and his little Lego collection. No, just me that finds it funny? Okay, I'll shut up, thanks. Number two, Gregory, who the fuck ever, Jimmy, is obsessed with Abby, even though she has no personality whatsoever. The only personality trait she has is being damaged. Okay, Shreg. I see you. I see right through you. So a school shooting happens, and the shooter is Abby's ex, Seth, because of course, he's that one-dimensional. So James is hiding on the school bus with Davis, but then he remembers about Abby and demands that the driver lets him off. The driver yelled, "You got a death wish, that's your choice, but I'm getting everyone else to safety." Yeah, a grown adult just let a teenager head to the site of a school shooting. Yes, much realism. Sprinting off in the direction of what I had already accepted as potentially my final destination, Abby remains at the forefront of my mind. Considering he's running to his potential death, there's no actual, emotion. In this scene, it feels very clinical. In Greg's book, there's a lot of telling instead of showing, saying that the character feels scared but not showing it, so the scenes don't really come to life. But we're not here to actually critique his work, we're just here to have fun and giggle. Seth was dressed in a long white coat with a pure white outfit underneath. This was all clearly premeditated. Like he wanted to proclaim how much blood he had shed, not just around him but on his body as well. He got what he wanted. He was drenched from collar to shoe in the blood of his fellow students. Number one, he sounds like a Final Fantasy villain. Number two, how can you tell his outfit used to be pure white if he's drenched in blood? That is a comical amount of blood, by the way. Jason, i.e. not James, the protagonist, ends up saving the day and tackles Seth, and James finds Abby and they hug or whatever. Everything seemed like it had happened over a period of 40 minutes, but it was in fact a small fraction of that. That seems oddly specific. 40 minutes. It's the little things about this that make me laugh, and I don't know why. I hope some of you are getting where I'm coming from as well. Don't know, 40 minutes is just very, very specific. But again, it was a small fraction of that, so... Abby refused to be more than a foot away from me for a single moment. We were both so incredibly relieved to still have each other, as if we were vital parts of the same system, one not being able to maintain the stability without the ensured safety of the other. I feel the need to point out right now that this is genuinely how codependent Onision expects his other halves, his partners in real life, to be with him. Abby then stays with James, sleeps in his bed and stuff, because James's mum doesn't care and her dad doesn't care. Great role models. All the adults are just really, really well balanced in this book. Shitpost, forgive me, sorry. Soz Shakespeare. Through our time away from school, we shared many moments of sadness, reflecting on the faces we would never see again. James's character so far literally hasn't given a toss about anyone other than Davis and Abby, so don't act as though you have human emotions now. A spokesperson for the president turns up to the school, gives a speech, and then the gym teacher, I think, gives a speech as well, but from a video call. Fuck it, why not? By the way, all of the characters sound the same. There's no distinctive voice from any of them. None of them are individual. They all sound weirdly clinical and detached and mental at the same time. And when I say they all sound the same, I mean they all just sound like Greg in real life. It's weird, it's kind of boring, it's very samey. Wrapping her hands around my neck, Abby got up on her tiptoes as pulled herself towards me. That's not right. She gave me the softest kiss I had ever felt. A surge of electricity shot between us. I told you it's Twilight, I fucking told you it's Twilight, and you all doubted me. I told you it's Twilight. But worse. Also, are you trying to imply that your incel self-insert has had more kisses other than this one? Because, please. Right, Abby's father starts screaming at her, and her father continued to run to throw objects lying outside at his own house. I actually like this. By like this, I mean I just found it funny, but I did actually like it. So congratulations, Onision, well done. I don't know if your intent was to make people laugh. The thought of someone being so mad that they just throw stuff at their own house. That's straight up my alley. That is straight up my alley of just like eccentricities. Like, I can imagine that. I like the idea of it. Again, seeing as it's meant to be a serious scene, I don't imagine the intent was to make one laugh. It reminds me of, there's a book by Fyodor Dostoevsky called The Idiot, and Madame Epanchin, the matriarch of the Epanchin family, she's like mental, but like all right kind of mental, just like an eccentric woman. She's always just shouting and being ridiculous and being like, someone hand me that chair, and then grabbing it herself. And The Idiot's one of my favourite books. So I don't know if it's meant to be funny, but it makes me laugh. Maybe I'll do a book review on it one day, who knows? It's well better than this. Alright, anyway, yeah, that's the only compliment you'll ever receive from me, Onision. Well done, I like that line, because it made me laugh. Okay? Okay, let's get back to the review. So Abby's dad ends up hitting James with a bottle, and then he dies and the story ends. No, unfortunately, that's not what happens. A policeman intervenes. Breaking the silence, Abby said, "You're the most loving and selfless person I've ever known." The fact that we know that this is just Greg saying this to himself through the medium of literature is too much to handle, okay? Greg just looks at himself in the mirror later that night whilst wanking and flexing, and is like to himself in the mirror, "You are the most beautiful, the most handsome, the smartest person I've ever seen." And then Kai, you hear Kai be like, "Honey, did you say something?" And he's like, "No, it was just the TV." Self-love and egoism is in danger of growing stale. I'm taking it to strange new places. Then the president comes into the classroom, because why the fuck not? At this point, why the fuck not? The president looked directly at me and said, "James Patrick, the boy who nearly saved the day. What is your question?" I replied, "You know who I am?" And of course the president knows who Greg is, because this is Greg's book and he can do what the fuck he wants, alright? Why the fuck not? Alright everyone, let's play some badminton, the sub said, pronouncing everything as it was spelled. Raymond responded, "Don't you mean badminton?" The teacher replied, "I didn't, Rayman, is that okay with you?" Now angered, he responded, "It's Raymond." What? Do Americans actually think it's badminton? What? Okay, so James's mum's boyfriend is a cuck because he's going to pay for all of James's food and bills whilst his mum goes to live with him, the boyfriend, and they're taking James's sister. So James and Abby are just going to live at his, rent-free, have everything paid for them by his mum's boyfriend, cuck. James says, "What's up, sis?" to his sister, because that is totally how siblings talk to one another. She replied, "Yeah, I'm sorry for putting up..." Not his sister, by the way, Abby. She replied, "Yeah, I'm sorry for putting up a wall earlier. That was weird of me, right?" I said, "That's okay. I mean, sometimes providing space is the best way to create more potential for personal growth." He read that in a fortune cookie once. I'm getting kind of bored at this point, and boredom isn't really a feeling you want to invoke in your reader. I'm going to skip past the stuff I kind of find boring. I also fear that this review is already way too long, so we're going to have to speed it up a little bit to try and protect my sanity. Just then, a knock sounded off on the door and my mum said, "Hey, you're not going to school today, you're helping me pack." We both replied saying, "Okay, mum." My heart fluttered hearing Abby call my mum, well, mum. I looked at Abby in disbelief. She looked back and said, "What? She could be my mum one day." Seeing her say that made my eyes feel like they were about to water. I was so happy to see how serious she was about us being together. Incest for the win. Okay, so this next bit's about Davis. Once we were in the store, he started wrapping tape around his head, contorting his face while dancing around looking totally freaky. I said, "Hey, I have to pay for that." He then turned to me looking completely goofy as he mimicked what I said to his warped tape face. "Hey, I got to, pay, for that, he said with his amazing comic timing. Is Greg being sarcastic or does he genuinely find this funny? What? On the way out, Davis wasn't done yet. He turned to everyone in the store and screamed, "Hi-ho, silver lady, mammy poppysicle." You're right, mate. His antics made no sense, yet still caused me to laugh even harder than I had done before. "Come on, Davis," I screamed as I headed into the parking lot. "Okie dokie, Captain Derp," he screamed back. I feel like crying after reading that. I'm not even joking, I can't believe all that came out of my mouth. The cringe, bro. I can't. Like, Onision really thinks this is the peak comedy, huh? Onision really thinks he did something with that paragraph, huh? Every significant moment in my life I want to share with you. She smiled and leaned in to kiss me. She then spoke under her cherry-smelling breath. Every significant moment come into my life will be significant because of you, James. Do you reckon Kai feels that way now that they might be in trouble with the FBI for exchanging nudes with a minor? Really activates the almonds, doesn't it? Check this bit out. Abby sat down with me, only to quickly huddle next to me for warmth. Did you slip on the ice on the way over Mr. Claus? David asked. I replied, no ho ho, and grinned. He said, no, but really, I'm surprised they didn't cancel school. It's kind of super crazy out. The bus driver screamed, sorry about the lack of heat. They gave me a pretty crappy bus. They said I couldn't handle the other buses or some junk like that. Davis leaped up, shouting, we love you, Mr. Bus Driver. You saved our lives. The driver then asked, oh yeah, what's my name? For some reason, my brain wanted to say daddy then, so I gotta work through some of my own issues today, I think. Davis replied almost instantly, well, what's my name? The bus driver responded, I asked first. Davis said again, well, I'll just call you superhero for now. The bus driver laughed as Davis sat back down giggling. That might be some of the worst dialogue I've ever read. And I read 50 Shades of Grey. At the moment, literally nothing is really happening with the actual plot in this story. Davis is jealous of Abby or something, I don't know, who fucking knows, who cares. I sat in Washington State history class and tried to open the note Abby wrote me, but Mr. Hanson immediately gave me a dirty look. I've just realised he has a character called Mr. Hanson.
It's Chris Hansen.
So Abby gives James a note which explains that she was raped by someone and her ex-boyfriend Seth repeatedly punched her in the stomach, which caused a miscarriage. I think I might have interpreted that wrong, but from what I gather from the text, the punching in the stomach caused her to miscarry the baby. And that guidance counsellor, Mrs. Robertson, the nurse, guidance counsellor person, whatever, hates Abby because she's pro-life. Because again, all of the adults in this story are extremely well-balanced people. Because this story is written by the Onion King himself, the only reason any of this trauma has been written in is so James can be a saviour to Abby, even though he doesn't do anything. That's when I noticed you staring at me in class. I didn't think you would ever give me a chance once you discovered me, but you did. You pulled me away from the horrible life I had found myself living and made me feel happier than I knew possible. My life before I knew you seemed more and more like some long, painful nightmare. James, storms into Abby's class and makes out with her in front of the teacher and the rest of the class. Because nothing pops a boner like good old-fashioned backstory trauma porn, am I right? So James gets suspended again for that little display, and Abby is allowed to skip gym to go home to bang James because, again, none of these teachers care about their jobs. So James and Abby go home to have sex. Oh, it's special. I couldn't stop devouring her till she began gushing and screaming wildly beyond control. Just remember that Onision wrote this. Enjoy that mental imagery. Hey, if I need to suffer through this, then so do you. You're welcome. So they spend all winter banging, and then they go back to school, and there's metal detectors all around the school. And Jason, that guy, keeps groping Abby. So James goes to complain to Mrs. Robertson, not Mrs. Robinson. Robertson, who says this. She answered, because I don't believe anything Abby says, and if it was Abby, I won't feel any need to take action. Mrs. Robertson sternly replied, James, the girl is no good, she's damaged goods, and no fucking teacher would talk like this in front of a student. The antagonists within this book are just cartoon characters. Shut up, Greg. Look at me genuinely getting vexed now. James approaches Jason and we have this exchange. I was told you groped a girl today, a girl that already asked you to leave alone. He replied, haven't you heard? I'm a stud around here. If I want to grab someone, it's gonna happen and they'll like it too. Again, 2D cartoon characters have more dimension than this. So James, the pacifist, suddenly turns into a really capable fighter and beats up not only Jason, but 3 of his jock friends. As jocks, we can imagine they'd probably American football teams. Yeah, beats them up. I reacted by spinning as I fell to the ground to deliver a sweeping kick. The 4th and final target, knocking him on his back as well. This one was larger than the others, so I made sure he would stay down by stomping on his balls before he could recover. I was going to break his nose so that he could literally see in the mirror what happened to people who treated women like possessions. Oh my god, Greg, you're so manly. You're just such a hero to us poor little women folk. Oh my god, guys. Despite me being almost 6 feet tall, I remained by far the smallest in the group. I love how it's almost 6 feet tall because this character is how Greg sees himself, but we all know he's like 5'7", pretending to be 5'11", so... I looked over to Abby still on the bus to see both her and Davis staring out at separate windows with their jaws completely dropped. And then everyone started clapping. And you know who that little boy James grew up to be? Albert Einstein. Anyway, so after that, Jason is all, hey man, do you know what? You're not so bad after all. After James beats him up and then nothing else much really happens. We're on chapter 16 by now, by the way. We're getting through this. We're almost there. Where do you want to go, Davis? Abby asked. He replied, I want to go to space. Again, I repeat my previous point that Davis is actually secretly 12 years old. Anyway, no time for that though. Here comes a forced tragedy for a plot point. What they had both seen was a man who had literally just jumped over a bridge that crossed over the freeway we were about to merge onto. I don't know how I feel about literally being used in this way in a story, in a book like this. I know there's a lot of things that are really unprofessional about this entire ordeal that we're going through, but just literally really sticks out to me like a sore thumb. I'm not sure why. I don't know why. It's probably not even a big deal. If anyone else gets where I'm coming from, then let me know in the comments below. Anyway, Davis gets hit by a van because he jumped out on the freeway and dies almost immediately, and James ends up blaming himself because everything is about him. Side note, I am totally aware of the concept of survivor's guilt. I experienced it when I was younger due to the death of a close friend of mine, and I know it's an irrational feeling. I'm very aware of it, don't get me wrong. But this is James we're talking about, and by James I of course mean Onision. This is Onision we're talking about. He will make anything about himself in any way possible. Observe this following logic. I was just sobbing. I hated myself for being in Davis's life because I knew if I never even met him, he'd likely still be alive. I always thought he was bound for amazing things. I kept reminding myself of the reality that he would have had those things had I never been born. How could I not blame myself? I had never hated myself more than I did in that moment. Now this is quite rare. This is galaxy brain level mental gymnastics. A round of applause for Onision please, because being this objectively self-centered is a talent. If mental gymnastics were an Olympic sport, Greg would own a gold medal. Alright, so the next part is Davis's funeral, and Davis's mum makes a speech. And when I read this, I actually shouted fucking hell at my laptop. I'm not joking, not clickbait. So they're reading and I went fucking hell. Observe. She continued, when I was able to spend quality time with my son, he often spoke of his friend James. James, as some of you know, was there when Davis passed. He would always say how much he liked James and told me how handsome he thought he was. He said just being around James made him feel like he was cool and part of something important. Even in death, Davis only exists to fuel James's ego. It's what Davis would have always wanted, I guess. I know James is angry at himself for what happened. I screamed at him when he showed up on my doorstep crying. Knowing Davis was with him, I held him responsible. But after talking to the emergency responders, after learning about exactly what happened, I realised James is actually the reason Davis is lying in this casket before us, instead of only ashes in an urn. He risked his life to pull Davis off of the highway. That act of selflessness made me better understand why Davis looked up to James. Imagine for a second that you die and your mother, your own mother, spends more time sucking Onision's dick than commemorating you. Incredible. So anyway, the funeral finishes and he goes back to school. It's weird how this story is less than 200 pages long and yet it just feels never fucking ending. Add in the never ending story there. Me talking to myself whilst editing. When my TA period began, Mrs. Robertson paid me a visit. She walked over to me grading papers and asked, how have you liked working with Mr. Hanson? I replied saying, I like it just fine.
It's Chris Hansen.
So they want him to run for school president for God fucking knows what reason. I feel like that is the theme of this story. God fucking knows why. Mr. Hanson said, you're a good kid. One of the best, I think. I wouldn't say it if it wasn't true. Sounds like, you know, in every crime show, there's that detective who's actually an alcoholic because they saw too much shit on the job and they come into work and they're hungover and, like, their boss is always like, you know, I'd fire you if you weren't the best goddamn detective I've ever seen. That's like, well, that was that. The police come to the school to talk to Abby. She didn't just deserve my support, she relied on it. We both needed to stand by each other through it all. Like two pillars leaning against only the other. If one of us fell, we would find ourselves both shattered to pieces on the floor. Ah yes, codependency. The foundation for every happy and healthy relationship. Anyway, the guidance counsellor thinks that Abby told Seth to shoot up the school because the guidance counsellor is unhealthily obsessed with Abby and none of the other teachers have noticed this at all. Abby tries to explain to James how she felt. When I was depressed and cutting, I told Seth in multiple letters that I wished everyone would just disappear, but that's instantly like a muscle response. I stood up, turning her remaining words into a silent panic, and I walked into the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. Oh no, a teenager wanting the entire world to disappear. I've never heard of such hate. Honestly, this book is so dramatic, and what a pathetic and dramatic reaction from the character James. Honestly, if someone even said that to me now, that they want the world to disappear, I'll just be like, lol, same. So James ends up having an angry shower and most likely beats off. This is such an accurate representation of Onision's real life. And then he decides that Abby wasn't responsible for the school shooting because of course she fucking wasn't. The guy who had the gun was responsible for the school shoot. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. It's fiction. But the angst itself was introduced and resolved within the space of 2 pages. What a waste of fucking time. This entire shitpost is a waste of my time. But here I am, continuing on. We're almost at the end. Turns out everyone heard Mrs. Robertson shouting that Abby was the reason behind the shooting, and now everyone at the school hates her. Someone chucks paint on her. But then the principal has this really weird overreaction to this. He looked over at me, still wiping Abby off. He was so upset he was for a moment and at a complete loss of words. He just stood there staring at us through the door with his mouth completely open. As I turned back to Abby, I could hear him scream, "Oh my god, why?" He was walking towards us, looking at the ground. There was a trail of black paint leading to his office. Fuck knows. Why is a good question. Anyway, the principal just keeps screaming at everyone because he wants to give himself like a stress and rage-induced heart attack so he can finally be free of this story. The principal says to everyone that it's not Abby's fault and asks to have a meeting with Mrs. Robertson. And then James's teacher says to James, "I hope they fire her." I was speechless. I thought he got along with her just fine. He could see my disbelief, so he explained, "Mrs. Robertson is one of the most manipulative, judgmental and possibly insane women I've ever met. I'm only telling you this because I've never heard Principal Lehman that angry before, and I'm pretty sure that means she's getting canned." Lovely. I'm sorry, but I have actually genuinely read fan fiction better than this drivel. 50 Shades of Grey is famously a fan fiction of Twilight, and it has more substance than any of this nonsense. So again, like nothing happens, no major conflict, and James begins waxing lyrical about Abby's paint-stricken shirt. I feel like at this point, most bad things that happen won't really hurt us unless we let them. She set down the plates and hugged me. I said, "You turn bad things into beauty, Abby." I pointed at the shirt. "It's like the moment that paint hit you, it became perfect." Jane Austen has nothing on this level of romanticism. Uh-oh, the vague plot is back, and this time it burnt down the school in a vengeance. Yep, that's right, crazy Mrs. Robertson decides to burn down the school. But luckily, all the teachers are given like their full pay, and all the students are given full credit, so all's well that ends well, I guess, I don't know. A conflict, a paragraph later, the solution. Abby and James visit the burned down remains of the school and they bump into Jason and it's all chummy. She and I turned around to continue looking at the burnt school. Suddenly I realised something, a small smirk crossed my lips. Well, I guess that means I won't be running for school president. That's it. That's the end. There are many things wrong with this story, but what is really peculiar to me is, as I just mentioned, a conflict arises and is resolved almost immediately, so there's no actual sense of urgency or whatever. There's no impact on what's actually happening. Even though you have things like, you know, he saw his best friend die, the school got burned down, and there was a school shooting. It just, like, I feel nothing towards these scenes, nothing. School gets burnt down, everyone gets put in a school and gets given good grades. Mrs. Robertson burns down the school. She gets put in jail immediately. Like, there's no pace, there's no pacing, there's no build up, there's no reason for me to give a shit about any of these characters. So my final thoughts on this story are, I can't believe I wasted precious hours of my life reading this. I genuinely feel like I've lost brain cells in doing this, and I've come out of it a worse person. 0 out of 10, would not do again. If this video gets 50,000 likes, 50,000 likes, I will review the next book. Alright, that is all for this video. It was a long one. It was a very long one, but we got through it in the end. I do hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed coming on this journey with me. I hope you found it funny. More than anything, if you got anything, if any of us got anything out of listening to Onision's drivel, it's that we had a little bit of a giggle whilst doing so. If you enjoyed this video, do remember to like, comment, subscribe. I try and make videos every day. Try, but don't always succeed. And remember, 50,000 likes and I will review the next one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!